I never thought I'd end up talking about this again. It's been years, but sometimes, when I walk past a small auto shop or smell the mix of oil and brake cleaner, the whole thing comes back, the noise, the trust, the papers I shouldn't have signed. I grew up fixing engines. My dad had a single-bay garage behind our house. He wasn't a businessman, he was a problem solver. When he passed, I kept that habit, fixing what's broken. For years, I worked for other people, crawling under cars while someone else counted the money. I wasn't bitter about it, I just thought that's how life went. Then my cousin Ray came back to town. We hadn't been close growing up, different sides of the family tree, same blood but different worlds. Ray was one of those guys who always had a story ready, always knew someone, in the business. When he shook your hand, you'd think he'd just closed a deal, even if he hadn't. He showed up at my place one Saturday with coffee and big talk. He said he'd been managing parts distribution for a chain downstate and had connections with suppliers. He wanted to open a small store, a place for mechanics like me to get parts cheaper and faster. He said I'd handle the shop floor, the inventory, the customers. He'd handle the books and growth. At first, it sounded like another one of his ideas that would fizzle out after the first hard day. But that night, when I sat at my kitchen table, I realized he might be right about one thing: I was tired of working for someone else. A month later we were standing in a dusty warehouse on the edge of town, arguing about paint colors. I put in everything I had, savings from 20 years of turning wrenches, a small inheritance from my mother. Ray said he'd match it, but his half came in late, then in smaller amounts, always tied up somewhere. He convinced me to take a small business loan in my name. Said his credit was a little messy from a divorce. I didn't like it, but he promised we'd refinance once things were rolling. He even brought me the paperwork and said, "Don't worry, it's standard, I used the same form before." I signed. The first year was good. We called it Hudson Auto Supply, simple and honest. I knew every customer by name. We weren't rich, but the bills got paid. I'd open the shop at 7, smell that mix of rubber and cardboard, and think, this is mine. Ray was rarely there. He said he was out making connections, but mostly he called in. He'd drop off stacks of invoices, say, "These go to accounts," and disappear again. I didn't ask questions, I figured that's what a partner does, he handles what you can't. Then, small things started to shift. A supplier called asking about late payments. I told him that couldn't be right, I'd seen the invoices marked paid. He said, "Well, we haven't seen a check in 3 months." I brought it up to Ray. He laughed, said, "Accounting's always behind. Don't worry." He had that calm tone that makes you feel dumb for asking. Another month passed. 2 more calls came in, one from the bank, one from a distributor. Past due. Ray said he'd straighten it out. He didn't. By the end of that summer, we owed more money than I'd made in a decade. When I pressed him, he said, "Look, we just need one big client. Once that's done, everything resets." Then one morning, he didn't show up. His phone went straight to voicemail. His apartment was empty. The sign in the window still said open, but there was nothing inside but unpaid bills and silence. A week later, I got the letter. The bank was calling in the loan, the one under my name. Ray's signature wasn't on anything. He'd filed the business under me as sole proprietor. The tax ID, the lease, the debt, all mine. The day I realized what he'd done, I sat on the shop floor surrounded by receipts and old oil filters and just stared at the empty shelves. I wasn't angry yet, not really. Just hollow. The next months were survival. I sold my truck to pay part of the debt. I worked nights at another garage. My wife, Sarah, started doing shifts at a diner. We didn't talk much. It wasn't anger, just shame hanging between us like smoke. When the IRS letter came, I almost laughed. It said I'd failed to report certain income from Hudson Auto Supply. I called the number on the notice. The agent said, "Sir, according to our records, your business sold inventory worth twice what you reported. Inventory we never had." I realized then it wasn't just theft. It was fraud, and he'd done it in my name. For a year, I lived like that, paying off what I could, trying to rebuild. The bank took the shop. My credit was ruined. Ray was a ghost. But ghosts don't stay gone forever. 3 years later, I was replacing a timing belt in a customer's car when an ad came up on the shop radio: "Visit Empire Auto Exchange, best prices, fastest service." Something in the voice hit me. That tone, upbeat, a little too slick, it was him. I looked it up that night. There he was on a local business site, a few towns over, under the name Ray Henson. Same face, new haircut. Empire Auto Exchange. Owner and managing director. I stared at that screen a long time. I thought about driving there. Walking in. Demanding what he'd taken. But I knew how that would end, yelling, maybe worse, and me looking like the crazy one. So I did what I knew how to do. I started fixing things, quietly, one bolt at a time. I made a list. Every supplier we'd used. Every invoice I still had. Every piece of mail he'd left behind. I found patterns, repeated amounts, identical signatures on forms that should have been different. I compared handwriting. I found one invoice paid to a company called MH Services. I looked it up, dissolved 2 years earlier. The mailing address? APO, box registered to Ray's old girlfriend. It was enough to show a pattern, not enough to prove it in court. But I wasn't done. I went to the county records office and requested business filings for Empire Auto Exchange. When the clerk handed me the forms, I felt my stomach drop. The founding documents were almost word for word the same as ours. Even the mission statement was copied, down to the typo in "Customers Trust." He hadn't even bothered to change it. That's when the anger came back, not hot but steady, like a pilot light that finally found gas. I spent nights digging through everything: digital trails, bank statements, old emails. My wife started sleeping in the guest room because she said I looked somewhere else even when I was home. She wasn't wrong. One night, around 2 a.m., I opened an old hard drive from the shop computer. There were files labeled "backups." Inside, I found scanned invoices with Ray's digital signature, the same one now on Empire's documents. That was the break. I saved everything, printed copies, and started making a binder. Every page numbered, every date checked. I didn't tell anyone, not even Sarah. I wanted it clean. The next step was finding someone who'd listen. I went to the police first. The officer looked at me like I was talking about a family argument. "You're saying your cousin stole your business 3 years ago?" "Yes." "And now he runs another one?" "Yes." He flipped through the pages. "Looks like civil court stuff, not criminal." I left the station with the binder still under my arm. Then I remembered a customer from years back, a woman who worked as a paralegal for a local law firm. I found her number, called her, and asked if she could look at something off the record. We met at a diner. I slid the binder across the table. She started reading and didn't stop for 20 minutes. Then she said quietly, "You know, this isn't just civil. If he used false documents to secure credit or dodge taxes, it's federal." That was the first time I felt something like hope. She introduced me to one of the firm's attorneys. He wasn't flashy, gray suit, plain glasses, but he listened. He asked for copies, and I gave him everything. He told me to sit tight, not to contact Ray. A month passed. Then another. Nothing. I figured it was going nowhere. Then, one morning, I got a call from the attorney. "You should come in." When I sat in his office, he said, "We turned your binder over to the state's fraud division. They're opening an inquiry." I didn't know what to say. He smiled slightly. "You did good documentation. Most people don't." That night, I told Sarah everything. She cried, not because of the money, but because, she said, you finally stopped blaming yourself. The state investigation moved slow, painfully slow. I'd go weeks without hearing a word, and then a letter would show up asking for one more document, one more date, one more signature. Each time I mailed something back, I thought, this is it, maybe now they'll see it. I didn't know how small I was in their world. Fraud cases, they told me later, are like puzzles without edges. The picture only shows when you find the missing pieces, and sometimes those pieces are people who don't want to be found. Months passed. I went back to working full-time at a garage across town. Every day I'd fix someone else's car and think, I used to own a place like this. And every night, when I closed my eyes, I'd see that logo, Empire Auto Exchange, and Ray's grin next to it. Then, one evening, I came home to a letter from the attorney. It said, the state has referred the case to federal authorities for review of potential wire and tax fraud. I didn't say a word to anyone. I just sat on the porch until the sun went down. A month later, 2 investigators showed up at my work. They weren't like the local cops, no small talk, no dismissive looks. One of them, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, said, "We're verifying your statement. You understand this could go a long way if what you're saying checks out." I nodded. They asked questions, about the loans, the signatures, the accounts. Then they thanked me and left. I thought that was the end of it. 2 weeks later, they called again. They'd subpoenaed records from the banks and suppliers. Turns out, Ray had been using my old business tax number for 3 years after Hudson Auto Supply closed, opening vendor accounts, applying for supplier credit, even collecting state refunds. He'd changed the name, but the ID was the same. That made it federal. They asked if I'd testify if it came to it. I said yes without thinking. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the balance was starting to tilt. When they finally questioned Ray, I wasn't there. But one of the investigators called me afterward. She said he'd been cooperative but inconsistent. I laughed when she said that. It was the politest way to describe the man I knew. They asked him about the overlapping tax IDs, the invoices, the accounts. He said it must have been a clerical mix-up. He said I'd let him use my business number to keep things afloat. He said I'd agreed to it. When I heard that, I felt the old anger burn up again, not because he lied, but because he was using the same calm, confident tone that had worked before. The investigators didn't buy it. They had proof, digital signatures, IP logs, bank transfers tied to his name. Still, they needed something stronger, a single piece that tied the new business directly to mine in a way no lawyer could explain away. That piece came from a supplier I hadn't even remembered, a small company in Ohio that sold us brake rotors years ago. They'd received an email from Hudson Auto Supply with a new address and payment info, sent after my business closed. The email address was the same one Ray used now for Empire Auto Exchange, just renamed. That was it. The attorney called me again. They're filing charges, wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion. I didn't feel happy. I just felt still. The case never made the evening news. There were no cameras, no headlines, just paperwork. He didn't go to jail for decades. Fraud rarely works that way, but he was convicted. He paid restitution, fines, and back taxes. The state froze his accounts. Empire Auto Exchange shut down within weeks. I didn't go to the sentencing. The attorney offered, said I had the right to speak. But what was there left to say? He'd already heard enough from me. Every document I'd collected, every number, every page, that was me speaking louder than I ever could in a courtroom. A month after the case closed, I got a letter in the mail, restitution payment, first of many. The check was small, a fraction of what I'd lost, but that wasn't the point. It had his name on it, written under pay to the order of me. I sat at the kitchen table holding that piece of paper and finally felt the air leave my chest. A few weeks later, I drove past the old shop. The building was still there, cracked sign, weeds in the lot, dust on the glass. I parked and stood by the door, looking in through the window. I could still see the outline of the counter, the faint marks on the floor where the shelves used to be. Sarah called me that night and asked where I'd been. I told her, just checking on an old ghost. She said, "You finally let it go?" I said, "Not yet. But I think it's letting go of me." Life didn't suddenly get better. It just got real again. I rebuilt my credit, one bill at a time. A friend helped me rent a small garage. It's not much, a few bays, a concrete floor, a leaky roof. But when I open it each morning, I know every tool, every smell, every sound. There's no partner to call, no paperwork I don't understand. Just work, honest and slow. Sometimes, young mechanics ask if I ever think about opening another parts shop. I tell them no, once was enough. But I tell them something else too. When someone asks you to sign something, and they say, "Don't worry, it's standard." That's when you worry most. Ray never called. I doubt he ever will. Word is, he moved again, new town, new story. People like him always find a fresh start somewhere else. But that's not my concern anymore. The only thing that matters is that my name, the one he used, the one he buried under lies, stands clean again. Sometimes I still see his face in my mind. Not the smiling version from the old days, but the one from the photo that came with the court file. No grin, no confidence, just someone finally realizing the world caught up. And when that image comes, I don't feel rage. I just feel quiet. Because I didn't win by shouting or fighting. I won by doing the one thing he never could, telling the truth, all the way to the end. That's the story. Not about revenge, not really, it's about getting your name back, inch by inch. People think justice is a loud thing, but it isn't. It's the sound of silence after years of noise. And for the first time in a long while, I can finally live in that silence.